All right, well, I'm sitting here with Ghost Meal from Everyday Backpacker. It's nice to catch up with you. We've talked a lot through various threads and live chats, but we've never actually spoken face to face. If that, I think that's correct, right?
I think this counts. Yeah, it's pretty close. But no, I don't think we've done anything like this before. So some
Yeah,
of the great things about the YouTube community is I have all these friends, and most of them I haven't met in person, but I've had some great conversations with them through
yeah,
various media. So
yeah. It's like that Ron Swanson line where he's talking about how he's still best friends. We still never talk sometimes, you know.
yeah,
It's,
exactly.
so I think of the YouTube community sometimes all these people that you see and you're like, hey, it's good to see you. I'm like, I have no idea what this dude looks like, you know, or I've only
Best
seen him
friends
on
through
videos.
comments.
Yeah, yeah, good. Well, hey, I wanted to get together with you because you posted a video. It was probably at least 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago now,
Yeah, something like that.
on med kits. And when I first saw it pop up, I went, "Oh, okay, another video on a med kit." And then you said very early on in that video that you were a paramedic, and that instantly it put me really in tune with what you're saying because it's we all have our opinions about what should be probably in a med kit. Like we all have opinions about everything that's in our gear, right? I know what's best or whatever. We subscribe to a certain line of thinking with how we should pack our packs and whatnot, right? And I'm thinking, who better to probably give us some good insight on a med kit than somebody who actually worked in this field, and you're a paramedic. So I guess let's start there. How long were you in that line of work? And I forget if you said that in your video or not, but I know you said you got out because it was just really stressful and whatnot. But how long were you doing that for?
So I had a very brief period of college right out of high school that I didn't do very well in. So then I decided to go into the fire academy. So I was a firefighter and a paramedic. And I did it for 10 years. The little asterisk to that is I was an EMT basic for I think 4 years, and then I
Okay.
was a EMT paramedic. The EMT part gets dropped a lot in the title, just paramedic usually,
Yeah.
or the other term for it is a paragod in the community because
Okay.
we think that we're untouchable.
That's right.
Um, but I did that for the last 6 years. So yeah, I did about 10 years before I decided to go back to college and yeah, without going into too much detail, there was some PTSD, some mental, physical
Sure.
issues that were there that kind of is. It's not a kind of a job that you can really like half butt your way through it. Like if you don't really stay focused and stay dedicated, you can get people hurt or killed or otherwise. And so, for me, like, it just wasn't as in the game as I should have been. And I thought it was just a good time. It was a good run, 10 years. So I decided to do something a little bit different. And that ultimately led me to pursuing the outdoor industry, so to speak. So I get to do this somewhat full
Yeah.
time now, and
Yeah.
it's been fun. But it did definitely, obviously, result in some experience and stuff in emergency medicine, and some interesting progression in my the way of approaching emergency medicine in the backcountry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't think we have to spend a lot of time getting into the details that you did on your video per se, because I encourage everyone just go watch your video and we'll put that in the link down below. I'll put that right away at the top in the description. But essentially, it's kind of about moving from this strapped to the top of our pack, to something more like this, right? In our
Right.
backpack, and I think you talked about most injuries, 99% of the injuries on trail are scrapes and bumps and maybe some twisted ankles, but the
Right.
need for tourniquets and splints and whatnot, it's just not needed. And if I guess you did need them, you can certainly make them with the gear that you have or with the surroundings, right?
Sure. And I won't go into too much detail, but basically in the video, what I talked about was the idea of packing our fears. And even while I was a paramedic and I was still a backpacker at the time, I definitely packed a lot of fears because, I just gotten all this great information and I'm like, "Oh, I've got to carry basically this field trauma bag." And I did. And I carried this massive thing for a long time. And eventually, over time, I started looking at what I had experienced in the backcountry because, I've been doing that since about the same amount of time that I was a paramedic. I started both in the late 90s, um, way back when. And eventually I was trying to get my gear weight down, and I realized, like, I looked inside this massive kit that I had, and I was like, I have never used 98% of this stuff
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
And then kind of looking at that experience is, okay, what do I use? You know, Band-Aids, moleskin, maybe the occasional 4x4, and then a bunch of meds, which we'll talk about later. And yeah, I just was like, I don't carry any of this stuff, and it weighs a ton.
Right.
And so it was more about negotiating my experiences and my knowledge with actual gear, and in kind of the opposite way of saying, okay, I don't need this because I know how to treat this with stuff that I carry otherwise. And so, like, for instance, the classic one is a tourniquet.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people say, oh my gosh, you got to carry a tourniquet because you might bleed out. Well, outside of combat wounds, bleeding out is an incredibly rare way of dying.
Yeah.
And if you do end up in a situation like that, all you need is a bandana and a stick and a little bit of knowledge and know-how, and you can make a pretty effective tourniquet.
That's right.
I can't imagine a situation where you probably are going to need to do that. I can't 100% say it won't happen.
That's right.
But it's just about, again, finding your comfort level versus
Yeah.
your weight level, if you will.
Yeah. And I think that's important too. It's, I'm about to lead a trip. Some of the guys, this will be their first time going out, and I was giving some tips on what to pack and what not to pack. And I said, hey, when it comes to your IFAK, your individual first aid kit, like, you're not going in combat, guys. We're going on a 20-mile backpacking trip in Michigan. Band-Aids and whatnot are probably going to be sufficient for you, However, I did put a caveat in there. I said, look, but if it makes you comfortable to take all this extra stuff, then take it. Like, just take it. It's okay. But so I think another component, and I kind of gave you a list of, kind of some ideas that I was going to talk about with you. I went through a curveball here. There is something to be said as well about not just packing for your own needs, but what about taking care of others? About, if you have those kind of skills, ought you to pack for caring for others and not just yourself? Or is that maybe where skills come in too? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. And again, I think everybody's going to have a different take on it. And at this point, I also want to make very clear, I don't consider myself an expert in this field. I've just had a lot of experience
Yeah.
and a little bit of training.
Ah, my liver! My liver!
I have not been an active paramedic since 2008. And if you threw me on an ambulance, I would probably crap my pants.
Even the CPR method has changed since then, right?
Yeah, even that. And so I just want to throw that out there in case anybody's, like, breaking out in the comment section at the moment. But as far as that goes, I may carry slightly more Band-Aids and stuff like that. But I think that, in a sense, is if you're going in a group and you have a little bit more knowledge, I don't know that I disagree with the idea that you shoulder a higher burden in that sense, as far as being prepared with gear, because I think everybody should have at least some degree of a first aid kit.
Yeah.
It might be more your responsibility to make sure that people are packing those things.
Okay. Yeah.
So
That's
I
a
don't
good.
think that I personally would carry necessarily more, other than I probably carry slightly more Band-Aids and more people, not necessarily for other people because I'm a little accident prone. Um, but yeah, I don't know that I would put that necessarily saying that, and again, it kind of just depends on your personal comfort level.
Yeah.
For me, my knowledge and my experience tells me that I probably don't need to again bring a whole bunch of extra stuff. I can make things work. That said, most of the time I'm out amongst people that I know very well, and I trust their knowledge, and I have no doubt that they're carrying at least something. Probably my oldest hiking buddy Jay, who has done the PCT and the AT both. He probably carries the least. I'm guessing he's got like a Ziploc baggie with like 3 Band-Aids in it and
Yeah.
like an alcohol prep, and that's it. And that's what he uses, and that works for him. So yeah, there have been times where I've had to fish something out of my kit for him because that's his comfort level. So But again, I think it's more going to be, um, what you're comfortable with. And this is an interesting thing with first aid, and especially with first aid training, is there's two categories of comfort level. One of those is having the comfort level of having the equipment, but even more importantly is the comfort level of knowing how to use that equipment.
Right.
Because you can bring all the equipment in the world, but if you have no idea how it works, you're useless.
Yep. Yep. And
You
I
know,
have a feeling that's where a lot of people are, not only in the backpacking community, but also maybe even in the prepper world. I don't know about you. I like to watch kind of the prepper videos and bushcraft videos. And you do get a sense that there's a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge, but sometimes I wonder about, do they actually possess the skill, to put that knowledge into practice. And I think that's really important for us of, what do we have and what do we need? And do I actually know how to apply the tools that I have? Right.
yeah, absolutely. And the other part of that too is that you can learn a skill, but if you don't practice a skill, it's very easy to kind of forget that. And I still will take classes. I've taken several classes since being a paramedic in wilderness first responder classes and things like that. And again, I mean, we didn't get dropped out of paramedic school and then just go, okay, you're all set. Every year we had to go through. I took more tests when I was a paramedic than I
Yeah.
did when I was becoming a paramedic.
Yeah.
And so again, you use it or you lose it.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that generally speaking, you need to be so proficient at a certain level in the backcountry, but having a comfortableness being able to respond quickly is going to make you
That's right.
more calm and more prepared to take care of a situation, and more likely to be able to keep your head in case something does actually bad happen.
Yeah, right. So let's talk about some application to what you're talking about here. I think one, we got to talk about location of where are we hiking, where are we backpacking, where are we spending our time outdoors, maybe even the seasons as well, and then what skills do we need. So let's group a couple things together here. I'm in Michigan, all right. We're flatlanders out here. We're not falling off cliffs in Michigan, right? And if we do fall off, maybe the one cliff we have, you're probably dead on impact because that's Pitcher Rocks in Lake Superior, right?
Yeah, been there.
Or you're rolling down some dunes on Lake Michigan, and that's just fun. So the threat of falling and actually surviving in Michigan, it's just flat, right? Now, conversely, out by you, out in the mountains, or even shoot 7 hours south of me, going down to the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, people fall out there, and a lot of the falls you're probably going to survive, but you're going to be pretty bad shape. So let's talk flatland. What kind of skills do you think us in the Midwest should maybe? What skills should we possess? And how does that differ from the skills that maybe you'd want in a more mountainous terrain?
So skill wise, I think a lot of people, especially in trauma situations, get a little bit what I call the wide eye effect, in the sense that it's trauma gets a lot of attention because it's messy and it's scary, and that's the things that keep us up at night. And really, medical issues are going to be what's primarily dealt with. But as far as skills go, I would say the basic skill set is going to be the same out here as it is going to be in Michigan. And I also should probably point out that I'm originally from Ohio, so I don't know if you want to end this conversation now or not. Um,
Notre Dame, Notre Dame.
there you go. All right.
Just Switzerland, Notre Dame.
So, but anyways, yeah. So, like I say, splinting a sprain, splinting a broken bone, those things are gonna be justifiable treatments in both
That's
locations.
right.
I think the things you're going to be more experienced with, or more differences, are going to be in areas of exposure. So things like hypothermia can be a
Okay.
little bit more of a concern here, because it is not unheard of for us in the middle of the summer to have snowstorms up in the mountains, in that sense. And so I don't know that the medical treatment versus knowledge necessarily varies as much as the skill levels, the general skill levels. One of the things that we're going to have to deal with out here is grizzly bears. And
And you demonstrated how to deal with that, if I remember right.
Yeah, that was a fun day.
For those who
That
don't
one,
know, he sprayed some bear spray and it came back on him, and he had 2 hours of fun. So
yeah, well, and that was
that was
a
awesome.
good humbling experience in the sense that I realized that it is important to know how to treat bear spray, because
Something to be said for it, man.
the wind is not always going to be cooperating, and I used to be more comfortable with the idea of doing things solo, even day hiking stuff out there, and now I'm not so sure because I would not have been able to get myself out of that area if it had been left up to
Good
me because I
point.
couldn't see. And we did have to treat that, and because of that, I do carry Sudicon wipes now in my first aid kit. So yeah, I guess that definitely is something I didn't think about as I was starting this, but I do have things that I treat for stuff like that. Um, Bear trauma, it's messy and it's really crazy. But one thing that we learn in emergency services is that at the end level, a wound is still a wound no matter what caused the wound. And so learning how to treat those, it might initially be really take you aback if you had to treat somebody who had been attacked by a bear, um, in that sense, but also knowing that that's a pretty rare occurrence and that there are things that you can do to prevent that. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be wound management. And so, like I say, skill wise, afterwards, there's not much different. It's going to be how you approach it prior to um, the event itself. And so that's where the ideas of risk management come into play. And I think we'll talk about that in one of our other segments here a little bit more in detail. But I think where the differences in the areas are going to be is going to be more in how you prepare um, for those kind of exposure areas. Excuse me. Obviously, in summer in Michigan, you're going to be more apt at having less. You don't need as much clothing. You don't need as
That's
many
right.
layers. There, you're going to be more concerned with, let's see, things like insects. Heat exposure is going to be a serious
Yep.
concern there.
Yep.
So having some knowledge of hyperthermia is going to be key. In the mountains, we're going to be dealing with both hyper and hypothermia because it is very easy to get cold up there. So we're going to be carrying more things like puffies and mid layers. And so I think the best skills I could say for different locations is going to be know the locations, know the hazards, prepare accordingly. The
Okay.
best way to treat first aid is to not be in the position to begin with.
Yeah. So it sounds like two universal skills are to deal with the thermias, hypo and
Those
hyper,
are,
right?
yeah, those
That's
are big ones.
universal because you got to deal
Mm-hmm.
with that here too. And even in the UP and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in the spring and the fall, um, weather changes up there on a dime, and you can get stuck in a really bad situation up there if you're not careful. So those seem to be two universal skills. Are there any other universal skills that people that go out in the backcountry should learn no matter where you are? If you had to name like one or two more.
Um, this is a tough one again because there's a lot of different things out there that I think are important. So I would say, looking statistically at what's the most likely events, those are the skills you're going to want to be the most familiar with, and they're not going to be the big scaries. They're going to be the small ones. I think the biggest thing would be, like I said, wound management. Anywhere from a cut up to a laceration or an evulsion or even some of the more fancy words for just basically something has happened that's caused your skin to start leaking the red stuff.
Yeah.
And wound management, such as how to clean a wound, because if you are bleeding out, I'm not going to be that worried about infection. But if you are minor injury, I'm going to worry about infection because I can get that bleeding stopped. But if you get a really nasty infection and we're a week into a week out on a trip, that can get really dangerous very quickly.
Yeah.
If you're bleeding out, that trip is over.
Yeah.
No
Let's stop
matter
the
if your
bleeding and
bleeding is
let's get
stopped or not.
emergency in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, again, that's just and that's just experience in that sense. But, being able to do things like properly irrigate a wound. Um, and then, knowing things like don't irrigate a wound with dirty water, treat the water first, something you might not necessarily think of. Do you need to carry sterile water? No, I don't think you need to go to that level.
I want to insert like a commercial here for like Catadine Be Free,
Yeah, yeah. The squeeze ones, that comes in handy because you can
That's
get some pressure there. You don't need to necessarily carry a syringe around. But again, irrigation, it's going to be more the big chunks, if you will, and just kind of clearing those out. A really big wound, the bleeding is going to clean a lot of that out on its own. But then, knowing how to apply decent direct pressure, knowing things like not to take the bandage off per se until,
That's right.
being able to put those 2x2s or 4x4s down. And then, one of the things that I learned in EMT basic is the basics are the most important. So ABC, airway, breathing, circulation, and wound management is part of bleeding. And so being able to apply a dressing really cleanly is going to go a long way to preventing that infection, keeping that wound from bleeding out and things like that. So I think wound management is definitely something because, let's face it, the majority of the wounds we're going to see are going to be scrapes and bruises. Me being the clumsy guy I am, I'm really good at finding the ground with my face. And so being able to just, treat real basic wounds and stuff like that is something I think we kind of take for granted. But, there's some skills there that can help with that. Next on that list, I think would probably be blister control. And in that same category, I would put other minor burns because at the end of the day, a blister is just a burn. It's a friction burn. And then the other burns are going to be, we have all been there where we've reached down to grab our pot because we think it's cool and, and you go flinging your ramen all over the place. And now you've got burns on your hands. At worst, at best, they're going to be annoying. If you get blisters and stuff like that, immediately the biggest risk to burns is infection. And so being able to treat those things for both comfort and keeping them clean and stuff, I think that's a really good basic all around skill to have. And the fact of the matter is that blisters are a common enemy of the backpacker. So knowing how to kind of treat those things, having some familiarity again with splinting, and how to create a makeshift splint. As I said, I don't carry splints in my kit because, the SAM splints and stuff that you would need are going to be really big. Those little dinky ones, you can use that on your finger, but honestly, the best way to splint a finger is just to tape it to the next one and let the other finger kind of act as a splint. And, like I say, we all have bandanas and socks and things and straps that we can, jerry rig up a good splint with. Most of your injuries are going to be ankle injuries or wrist injuries because, again, when we fall, we always try to catch ourselves and you have an additional load of weight on you. And so it's easy to strain our wrist. Wrists are one of the easiest things in the world to splint. Oftentimes you can just immobilize them up against the body. So kind of those kind of skills are really helpful. In a larger sense, CPR is always a good thing to know for all walks of life. However, I also, unfortunately, as a paramedic, I know when I would know when to and not to do it, what the survival likelihoods are, but I would never burden somebody who doesn't have that knowledge to say, oh, it's a hopeless cause. If doing CPR is going to make you feel like you did everything you possibly can, then absolutely use that CPR, do it. But it's definitely a skill that I don't think can be understated, in all walks of life.
That's right.
So CPR, I think, is definitely a good one to know.
Yeah, that's one that I've maintained. So I was a certified lifeguard in the past. And I think we had about 7 or so different certifications, with lifeguard duty, first aid, anything that has to do with injuries in the water, we handled, and heart attacks and things of that nature, strokes, we had that sort of training. And I've kept up on a few, a little bit through work, first responder training at work. So I've been able to maintain it. But it's amazing how much you lose if you don't, at least practice it through your head and maybe run through some scenarios, and even practicing at home, just throw a bag on the ground just to treat it like a live situation, right? Because there's so many things to consider even when it comes to
Right.
CPR, like you were just saying. So
Right. So
yeah, it's
there's
a
a
big one.
reason why those certifications have expiration dates, and
That's
it's
right.
not that it's because without that practice,
Yep.
it's hard to do. Now, if you are in a situation and you can't remember exactly how to do it and you just do your best, nobody is going to come after you. I mean, there's laws against that. It's Good Samaritan laws. You're
That's
not,
right.
you're not going to make the situation any worse, unfortunately. The other thing, though, with that is the worst enemy of the EMS service was shows like Rescue 911. It made you think that CPR was this magical thing, and it's an important thing to know, but there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, and it's not the cure-all that it was kind of made out to be in the
That's right.
90s.
Yep.
But again, it goes back to if you feel comfortable knowing that skill, then absolutely 100% know that
Yeah.
skill.
Yeah, that's good. So we got quite a few skills. We've got the thermias. We've got basic wound management, stop the bleeding, prevent infection, CPR. And where, I don't want to draw this out too long, but where's a good spot to go and get some of these skills? And even some of them officially, like if you want to go get CPR, nowadays too, like what is it? The AED, is that what that's called?
Automatic external defibrillator.
Yes, the defibrillator training. I mean, that's not really applicable out in the backcountry, but where can somebody go to learn this stuff adequately?
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, I do think seeking out a licensed type provider is important, especially this day and age. Everybody says, "Well, just watch a YouTube video on it." These are skills that I think require a certain level of training to be taught. And
Yes.
so I definitely recommend going to more of an official route. And there are a lot of ways that you can find that out. The easiest ways to do is just to contact your local fire department and say, "Hey, I'm looking to do some classes." They're going to know what classes are going to be available. They may offer classes themselves. The other source for basic first aid skills and things like that is the American Red Cross. They do both online and in-person training for different things depending on the skill level. And even though there are some specialized considerations with backcountry, the basic skills are there.
That's
And
right.
so even just a regular Red Cross first aid course is definitely going to be helpful. If you want to go a little bit further into a more specialized field, there's always training levels you can go up to. I don't think you need to become a paramedic just for backcountry use.
That's right.
Trust me, that's 2 years of my life. I'm never going to get back going through that program. Whole lot of heartburn and a big addiction to coffee came from that.
Yeah.
So, but there are other classes that you can take that are shorter that are definitely helpful. And one that I would probably recommend the most, or very avid people in the backcountry, are either going to be a wilderness first aid class, or even better would be a wilderness first responder class. Wilderness first responder class is going to be a little bit more expensive. I think generally it's around $700 now or something, depending on the
Okay.
course. And it usually takes about a week to go through. A first aid course, probably about a weekend. And those can be found through a couple different organizations. NOLS
Yep.
offers classes. Wilderness Medical Associates, I think, is the one I took mine through. I can't remember exactly, but if you type in, woofer or wilderness first responder, things like that, you'll see these things come up.
Cool.
And you can tell most of these are accredited level programs, so they're taught in colleges. And that's another thing to consider too, is if you live close to a college, like I live near
One of those
University,
colleges near you.
yeah, University of Montana, Billings, and they have an outdoor program here, and so they also offer wilderness responders and stuff like that. And so oftentimes you can kind of slide into those spots if they have places open. If it's a full program, maybe not, but sometimes you're able to piggyback onto those courses as well.
Cool.
But yeah, they have lists of courses. Oftentimes they're taught in really cool places. So you might have to do a little bit of traveling, but I took mine. Actually,
Make
I
a
took
trip
my
out of
wilderness.
it, man. Just make
Right.
a trip
I
out of it.
took I took my wilderness responder in Red River Gorge.
That's awesome. That's cool.
So we
That's cool.
we
Do you think post this discussion here in the next day or two, you could find a few of those links and shoot them my way so I can get them in the description?
absolutely, yeah, I can
Okay.
do that.
Yeah, I think that would be good for people to know, especially that they're all over the place. It sounds like, which is really cool. Which is really cool. I got one more question for you. When it comes to our first aid kits, then I'm gonna have a little dad joke, a little pun here. Should we just rip the band-aid off and cut our gear down, or should we keep packing our fears until we learn the skills? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I feel like that one can go either way. I wouldn't, again, as I said in my video, I would never fault somebody for taking a piece of equipment.
Right on.
I will fault them for not learning how to use the equipment. And that sounds a little bit harsh, but I think the most important tool that we're going to be taking with us into the backcountry for first aid and things like that is going to be
Yep.
what we have in our skill set. You know, I as an EMT basic wasn't using a heart monitor because I wasn't trained how to use a heart monitor. I was when I was a paramedic, and I wish I could have gone back. But I'm not going to be carrying a piece of equipment in that I don't know how to use at least adequately enough. But that being said, if bringing a trauma dressing versus a 2x2 makes you feel more confident, then bring it. You're not going to hurt anything as long as you're willing to carry the weight. So I don't think in this case anything should be done solely for the reason of creating less weight.
Yep.
It should be you should be able to make it smaller if you're comfortable doing so.
Makes sense.
So you know, the average first aid kit doesn't need to be huge. You know, like I said, my buddy Jay, he probably carries way less, but he also has a lot of experience, and you know, he's got thousands and thousands of miles under his feet, and so he just knows. I haven't quite gotten there yet. I still do carry this. I mainly go with a pre-made kit because
Yep.
I'm lazy and because I will inherently forget things. So, yeah, I can say I feel comfortable using this. I feel comfortable with my skill set to know not I don't need more than this. Um, that wasn't necessarily always the case with me, but it was again balancing out my knowledge as a medical professional and my experience as a backpacker. So within reason, if it makes you feel comfortable, go ahead and bring it. But again, know what you're using.
Yep. Yep. I think that's good, and I think you know, if you made it thus far in the video and you're looking for the key to a good med kit, like most things, if somebody says there's a key to whatever it is, they probably have it wrong. Oftentimes it's what's the application, what's the scenario, what's the skill set, what's the knowledge base, and we got to go off that. So I think what you offered us is very wise, and I think really good things to consider. I'll
One
close
more
this out
thing.
unless there's one more thing you have there.
I did have one more thing. You know, the basic things that you're really going to find in every kit that's going to be used by far the most are going to be Band-Aids, moleskin, alcohol prep wipes just to clean things off.
Yeah.
And just the thing I think gets overlooked the most, though, those are really obvious. The things that get overlooked the most are going to be medications. You know, there's a lot of things that you can do with medications, and we don't really think about the medical side of it, but that actually happens more often than trauma does. And so things like diphenhydramine or Benadryl for allergies, because those can become issues out there. One of the most common things that you're going to experience in the backcountry are going to be headaches. And those can be caused by dehydration. They can be caused by altitude sickness. And guess what? You can treat both of those with NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or ibuprofen. And so those, you know, carry a bunch of ibuprofen is good. Things to treat diarrhea, because I don't know any backpacker who hasn't had that happen in a backcountry.
Yep.
So Just your basic meds, and also knowing, specific things. Like for me, I get the occasional migraine, and so I have to carry in migraine medications and stuff. So don't forget your medications.
Yeah.
But if you have, like I said, the basic things like first couple 2x2s, some band-aids, maybe a small thing of tape, and some stuff to treat blisters, you're going to cover about 99% of the stuff you're going to encounter in the backcountry.
Yep. Yeah. Leukotape, man, that stuff is that's money. I have it wrapped around my little pill bottle that I keep some Aleve in, and actually some toothpaste pills. I just kind of split it there. Most of my trips are a weekend, so that's sufficient. And then around my lighter, just a bunch of Leukotape, and that stuff does wonders.
The best treatment for not having blisters is not wearing waterproof shoes, but I'll get off that soapbox.
Another video, another time. Good. Well, Ghost Meal, appreciate you, man. Good having you. Good chatting with you. I'll have to do this again and some other topics.
Sounds great. I'm more than happy.
All right, man. We'll talk to you later.
Have a good one.